Hey, Sharina.
Hello, it was just me.
There's 2 people wanting to join in, but I'm gonna prep my stuff first.
Okay, cool. You do that. I will get some food.
Hey everyone, how's it going? My name's Andrew, and thank you for taking out today on your busy Sunday morning or potentially lazy Sunday morning to join us for a beginner photography workshop. I want to do a special shout out to George's for hosting the workshop today, and I hope you guys get a lot out of today's workshop. It will be quite content heavy at times, but I am sure that you guys will, by the end of this, get out of shooting automatic and onto manual. Before we kick off and we get started, I want to make sure everyone has a couple things. So first of all, have your camera with you. I will be doing some practical exercises today. And during the practical segments of it, I want you guys to turn on your video if you wish, unmute your mics, and we're going to be going through some sections which I am sure you're going to have a lot of questions during it. And other things as well to keep in mind. During today's agenda, in the very early stages of today, we're going to just go through kind of like how photography works. And then from there, we're going to go on to talking about how to manipulate certain elements of your camera to get the result that you want. Because there's so many of you in today's workshop, normally when I run this workshop in person, I will have anyone be able to just kind of jump in, ask some questions over the mic. But I think with the sheer amount of people that are in today, it's probably better to use the chat. So if at any point you have any questions or you just have any comments, just please put them in the chat, which you can access by clicking at the bottom. Just click the chat, ask a question, and I will try and get in and answer it as fast as I can for you. Some other things as well. If you don't have your camera on you, that is okay. This whole webinar will be recorded. So if you can't do anything practical at the moment, you can also do so later on at your own leisure. Other things as well for the practical parts of the segment in the workshop. I want you guys also to have two objects. So the first object is just a static object. This can be a water bottle, a tissue box, a vase, TV remote, whatever you have around you that you can take a photo of. And the second thing is a moving object. Now, I know for some of you, this might be a little bit hard. If you live near a main road, you have plenty of moving objects outside your house. Just take photos of some cars. But if you don't have anything like that, if you have a fan maybe, or if there are trees blowing outside, anything that's moving will be perfectly fine. If you don't have that, make sure to watch the recording again and do the exercise. And from there, you should be able to get some pretty cool results and learn a bit about the shutter. All right, so let's kick off into the presentation. So first off, before I talk about how photos are produced, I want all of you to just type in the chat box where you are at in terms of your photography. So whether you're just starting out, whether you've just bought a camera last week, whether you've used cameras for a certain amount of time, just so I know where you guys are at, just chuck it in the chat and just let me know where you are with photography. And whilst that's going on, cool, shoot on auto, but you're a videographer waiting for your M50 to be delivered. How exciting, awesome. Once that's delivered, you can definitely have a look and use the practical stuff in this. And oh, awesome. First DSLR, how exciting. And bought a camera 2 weeks ago at Auto. Beginner, awesome. And also, just so I know, what kind of cameras are you using? So what brand of camera are you guys using? The majority of you, are you using Canon, are you using Fujifilm, Nikon, Olympus, Panasonic? Awesome. Awesome. Nice. Lots of Fujis. We have a couple Canons. Sony A7 kindergarten stage. Nice. Canon. All right, cool. So we have a lot of Canons, a couple Sonys, a couple Fujifilms. Awesome. All right. Awesome. Awesome. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to walk through kind of how a camera produces a photo. Because knowing this will make a lot more sense when I go through the specific elements of how a camera actually produces a photo and how you can manipulate all these elements to get the photo that you want. So the first thing is you've got on this diagram, this lovely, lovely diagram, what appears to be here. This is your lens, which is on the far left. And then the thing connecting behind the lens where you've got that cone pointing towards the sensor and the viewfinder and the shutter, that is your camera. And basically how it works is on the actual lens, you can see within the lens on the inside, there are a couple of elements. They're basically just glass elements that have some coatings on them to basically help transfer light from the outside of the camera, travels through into the camera. Now with lenses, they all have different qualities. the optics in the lens vary from company to company and also vary from price points as well. So for a more premium lens, the coatings on the inside and the outside of the lens are a lot better in transmitting the light source from the front of the lens to the back. And basically all the optics that are housed within the lens basically bounce the light in and out of the lens so that it makes its way eventually into the camera. Some coating examples, there's coatings that help your lens not fog. There are coatings to help your lens prevent it from dust or any kind of like moisture affecting, and also to kind of like fight against UV rays. Because I'm sure you have experienced shooting a photo with your phone and there's been some really bad sun flaring and just weird aberrations and some weird spots coming through. A lot of kind of like mid-tier lenses and even basic camera lenses have coatings to prevent as much as that as possible. So camera lenses are a little bit more sophisticated. And basically what they do after that, once that light bounces through, travels through the lens, it hits the camera. So nowadays we are privileged that we have a lot of options in terms of camera gear. We've got DSLRs and mirrorless cameras for both of them are the most common kinds of cameras right now. So DSLRs is kind of what this diagram is depicting, and it has a mirror. So you can see that mirror on the inside of the camera, and you can see with what the mirror does is it splits the light into two. So it splits the light towards the sensor, and then it splits it up towards the viewfinder piece. Now, in a mirrorless camera, so anyone that's in this chat, in this call that's using a Sony A7, Panasonic camera, or a Fujifilm camera, or if you're getting that Canon M50 or any kind of mirrorless camera, this mirror section inside the camera does not exist. So the light just travels straight from the lens to the sensor. Now, before the light touches the sensor has a shutter curtain in front of it. So the shutter curtain basically is a physical barrier between the light source and the sensor, and the shutter moves up and down really quickly depending on how fast you set it. So if you do a really fast shutter speed, it will just open and close really quickly, and that light source will just quickly go in. Or if you open it for a long time, 1, 2, 3 seconds, that shutter remains open and your sensor gets exposed more to light. Now, the second light source that bounces off the mirror into the viewfinder, that's how you're able to see through your lens. So for a DSLR, when you're looking through the top of your camera, through the viewfinder at the top here, that's how you're going to be able to see through your lens, because light travels through the lens, bounces off the mirror for you to view that. Now, in a mirrorless camera where this mirror does not exist, there's basically a computer or a processor that processes everything in real time. So what you're seeing through your viewfinder at the top is basically what the final result of a image is going to be live. So the light source travels straight to the sensor, and the sensor processes everything, and then you can see a live feed of it. That's the only difference between the two, and also the reason why mirrorless cameras also use a lot more battery power, because they have to run a computer basically full time, whereas a DSLR is still a very physically operated machine, which won't use as much juice, hence why a lot of DSLRs last a lot longer than mirrorless cameras in terms of battery life. However, both still produce very good images still to this day. Mirrorless technology is growing. DSLRs are still used widely with professionals too this day and age. So I'm sure most of you will have, if not both or one or the other, and you'll be playing around with it a lot today and kind of learning more about how your camera works, and so you can get that awesome photo coming out. Now, before I jump into the actual more practical part of the workshop, I'm going to drop a link in the chat, which is for my cheat sheet. So please, everybody, head to that Google Drive link now and just download that PDF document, because we will be using that throughout the workshop. And this cheat sheet will help you a lot with basically understanding the elements that we're going to work with a bit further. So please download my cheat sheet. Link is in the chat. Keep that with you. Make sure to bring it along with you on your shoots when you're just kind of still trying to figure things out. And I'm sure it will help a lot. All right. So jumping into the lenses a little bit more in detail. So with lenses, so just so you understand how that initial light source interacts with the camera, there are a couple things to note on the anatomy of the lens. So on the lens, you have a couple of things. The first thing is at the front is the filter thread. Now, I'm sure most of you would have bought some kind of filter protection. If you can see at the top of my lens here, I've got a filter on top of it. And basically all that does is with a UV filter, it just protects the lens from any kind of damage if you drop it or if you bump it into something at the front element. But that filter thread, you can also screw other filters in as well. So you can get polarizing filters, which is like your sunglasses. So it basically gets rid of reflections, and through those really harsh sunny days, you still be able to produce some really nice photos. And then you've got a focusing ring as well. So depending on what lens you have, sometimes the focusing ring is actually at the back and the zoom lens, the zoom element is at the front. But the majority of your lenses should have a focusing ring at the front of the camera. And then you've got the zoom ring at the back as well, which will basically enable your enable your lens to zoom in. In terms of numbers, this might be something for you to write down to keep as a mental note when you're buying lenses in the future for your camera. Typically around the ranges of 10 mil to about 24 mil, that's considered a wide angle lens. From 24 to 100 mil, so from 20 to 70 mil is considered an everyday lens. So this is like the most common focal length for people who go on travel or want to do a bit of landscape and a bit of portrait work. So that is the typical range. From 70 to about 150-ish, they're considered portrait lenses or semi-telephoto lenses. Really good for taking either headshots or really close-up portraits. And then anything 150 and beyond is considered a telephoto lens. And this is useful for people who do wildlife photography, product photography, and also sports. Those focal lengths that are like 150 onwards zoom in really, really far. To make it super easy for you to remember kind of what lenses do what, the smaller the number, the wider the field of view. The larger the number, the more narrow the field of view is. So if you're going to explore shooting landscapes, you're obviously not going to buy like a 500, 400 mil. You want to be able to capture the most in the frame, most of your subjects. So you're going to be looking more at around like a 12, 14 mil type of lens. There's some other markings on your lens as well. Now, not all lenses will have this, but if you look at the lens on the right, this is more common in DSLR lenses where it's got like a little screen on it and it has distances. So the distances depict how far the subject needs to be away from your camera to be in focus. So for anyone that has a lens like that one on the right that has that little indicator on it, if it says 5 or 3 or 0.8, what that means is the subject needs to be 0.8 meters away from the lens for it to be in focus. Anything that's closer to that won't be in focus. And that depicts the minimum focus distance. So how far they need to be away, and then anywhere beyond that should be fine. They should be in focus. It's really handy to know if you're going to be using a portrait lens and your subject is standing really close to you, like almost in front of your face, but your lens needs them to be a meter away for it to take focus. So that's what that little distance indicator on your lens is with the little screen. Now, the majority of people, sorry, just to quickly answer Neelan's question. Yes, please shift to your prime lens. I think it'll be a lot useful for you during this workshop. Okay, for the majority of you, and also myself, your lens won't have any kind of physical distance indicator or anything else. So On your lens, you've got a couple things to kind of think about when you're using it. On the side, you've got like your autofocus, manual focus switches. I've had some people come into store at some points and asking me why doesn't their camera focus? And that's because their lens is on MF, which is manual focus. So if you guys ever are on the field and you accidentally knock a switch or something, or your bag just knocks a switch on your lens and you realize your camera's not focusing, check this first. Check that your autofocus to manual focus switch is on AF. And at the bottom as well, on some cameras, especially the Nikons, they do have a second switch that has autofocus, manual focus as well. So make sure that is always on autofocus if you do tend to use autofocus. Now, the one thing I'm going to go through in a second is about the aperture of the lens. And there's some readings at the front of your lens that you need to know how to read to understand your lens a little bit further. So without further ado, if everyone's got their cheat sheets, we're going to go through the very beefy portion of the workshop, which is talking about the exposure triangle. So for the exposure triangle, these are three elements that literally your camera manipulates, and that's how it produces a photo. If you can master these three elements, that's all you need to be a good photographer. No matter if you're a professional or a beginner, this is all we do. Not all we do, but this is like 95% of what photographers do. What separates a good photo from a bad photo is being able to control these three specific elements. Now, to run through, the first thing is the aperture. And the aperture is a little ring that's housed into your lens. So there's this little ring that you can manipulate so that it opens a lot wider to allow more light to go into the camera. And also with the same ring, you can tighten it so it's smaller and less light goes into the camera. So that's the aperture ring that sits in your lens. So that's the first point of contact that your light is going to go through your camera and what you're going to manipulate first before it goes into the camera. And probably the most important of the three in regards to how much control you get over the look of your photo, but also how much light heads into your camera too. The aperture is very important. So make sure to keep that in your head as we go through the next exercise in a second. The second element that you control in your exposure triangle is the shutter speed. So if you remember in that diagram, after the light travels through the lens, through the aperture ring, and then into the camera, either hits a mirror or goes straight to the sensor, there's a shutter curtain. And as I said, the shutter speed is literally how fast the shutter moves up and down. And this is in a fraction of a second. It's not in a second. It is only in a second when you shift it on your camera and it goes down and it has two little apostrophe marks, and then it's in whole numbers. But the majority of time you're working in a fraction of a second. So 1/8,000th of a second is very fast, and 1/4 of a second is getting closer to the whole number mark. So it's a little bit slower. As you can see in that bottom of the triangle, it's got two demonstrations. 1/8,000th, the guy is in complete still motion, and in 1/4 of a second, you see it's a little bit more blurry. On your cheat sheet as well, if you have a look at it, on the shutter line, it's got a person running, and you can see that it slowly goes from super sharp on the right and down, 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 and there's a little bit of blurred motion. So when you're having a look at your shutter speed, make sure to kind of shoot at the right shutter speed so you get the effect that you want. And for anyone who lost the cheat sheet or needs to download it again, or who has joined late, I've just sent the link again in the chat. So please download that and get that cheat sheet handy on you. Okay, so the next thing is the ISO. The ISO is the last element, and it differs from the aperture and the shutter speed. So the aperture and shutter speed control how much light goes into the camera. So the aperture controls how much light goes into the lens, whereas the shutter speed controls how much light goes into the camera via the shutter curtain. So one's in the lens, one's in the shutter element, which is in the camera. So the ISO is your sensor, and that's the last bit. This just controls how sensitive the camera is to the light source you've exposed it to. That won't make too much sense now, but I'm going to explain it more when we get to that later in the workshop, and you'll have a little bit of a better grasp at ISO. So moving on, we are going to go into the aperture. Now, before I go into this, I'm going to explain a few terminologies and a few numbers with you, so you kind of get a better grasp on that. And then from there, we'll go through the exercise. So if everyone has their cameras on them, if you don't have your cameras on them, it's fine. I'll walk you through my camera at the front of the lens. And what we'll do is we'll kind of understand what the numbers are on the lens of the camera. So the first one I explained was the focal length. So these numbers at the top here of the lens. So you can see it says 24. It goes all the way up to 105. So this is the focal length, so how much zoom there is or how wide you want your photo to be. But at the front of your lens, there should be this number. So if you can see at the front of my lens here, you can see it's a little bit blurry, but you can see that it says 1.4, and it says 24 to 105. So my lens is a 24 to 105 mil. And then on the left here, I've got 1 colon and 4. So what that colon number is, I'm going to guess most of your lenses, sorry, losing my voice a bit. I guess most of your lenses will say 3.5 dash 5.6. And some of your lenses might just say, like mine, 1.4. Or for Nilan, who's using a prime lens, yours probably says 1.8 or f2.8. If you can, find that number for me and put it into the chat and tell me what lens you've got. So the first set of numbers I want is what range your lens is. So I'm going to type an example into the chat. So my lens is a Panasonic 24 to 105 mil, which is my focal length. And then I've got this number next to it, which is 1:4. For some of you, it will say, cool, perfect, 1855, 1.4 to 5.6, perfect. Some of you will say 3.5 to 5.6. Some of you will say 1-2.8. Some of you will say 1-1.8. So awesome, 2.84, FE4. All right, awesome. Thanks, Nilan. That's good, f1.7, awesome. So what this number is, so when you're looking at your lenses, excluding the focal length, I want you guys to focus on the F number. And for Donna and for Lorraine, Amanda, and DG Healy, focus on those numbers after the colon. So you have the 3.5 to 5.6, you have the 2.8 to 4, and the 4 to 5.6. For everyone else who just has one number, so Lorraine, yours just says F4, Nilan, F1.7, and the Vagabonds of Sweden, yours says F4, Tanya, F1.4. What that means is your lens will always open up to 1.4. Now, if you guys have the cheat sheet, you can see that the aperture from the left to the right, on the cheat sheet, it says F1.4, F2.8, and it goes all the way up to, from memory, I think it's F32. Basically, what this F number is how the aperture is measured. All right, awesome. How the aperture is measured in terms of kind of, this is how it's read. It's a little bit confusing. So first, for those who are starting out and trying to understand it, the smaller the number, the more light it lets into your camera, and the bigger the number, the less light it lets into your camera. So if you don't have the cheat sheet on you, have a look on the screen in front of you and look at the example of the candle that we have. So you can see that at f1.8, you can see that the candle and the flame is quite bright. At f2.8, it's a little bit darker. At f4, it's a little bit darker again. 5.6 darker, 8, 11, 16, f22. They're all shot at the same shutter speed. So you can see that at 1/90 of a second. But you can see that the only element that they're changing here is the aperture, and you can see how dark it gets. But you also notice as well in this, I guess, how much of a difference there is in light. And you also need to realize too that not all lenses can open and let in the same amount of light as other lenses. For example, so we'll go through, let's go with Amanda's lens. So Amanda has a Fujifilm 18-55 and it says 1:2.8-4. So what that means is if your lens has an aperture range, which is half of you, if your lens has a aperture range that says 1-2.8 to 4, or whether it's DG Healy's lens that says 4 to 5.6, or whether it's Donna's lens that says 3.5 to 5.6, what that means is when your lens is at its widest, it can only open up to 3.5, which I would say somewhere between the second and the third candle photo. And the more you zoom in towards the end of your lens, it can only open up to 5.6, which is kind of the candle photo on the far right. So if your lens has that, so if it's a zoom lens, for example, it's an 18-55 and it says 4 to 5.6, at 18 mil, it can only open up to 4. And at 55 mil, the smallest it can the most it can open is 5.6, which effectively means that when your lens is at its widest, it does better in lower light conditions, or it lets more light in when it's wider. And the more you zoom in, the less light it's able to produce. So why this happens with lenses and why they have an aperture range is because it's cheaper to manufacture effectively. So when you zoom in, the aperture ring on the inside actually goes smaller. For some of your lenses, so for example, Vagabonds of Sweden, you have a 24-105 mil with that's just f4, and Lorraine has a lens that's 24-70 and f4. And all that means is that no matter if you're shooting at its widest, so at 24, or if you're shooting at 70 mil for Lorraine or 105 mil for Vagabonds, that means you still get the same lighting performance, no matter if you're shooting wide or you're shooting tight. That's the same with this lens that I've got on my camera. So it's a 24-105 mil, and it's got 1:4, which means that no matter if I'm shooting at 24 or no matter if I'm shooting at 105, I'll always get the same lighting performance as I do, no matter if I'm shooting wide or narrow. For those who have prime lenses, obviously you're not zooming. So for Tanya, you're 23 mil, and for Nilan also, you've got a prime lens, and Vagabonds as well. So that lens obviously does not zoom. So it will only open, it can open to that number. There is no range associated with it. On top of that as well, this is really important to note. So if later on you're looking at buying other lenses and you want a lens that's kind of like the same range, you want an everyday lens that zooms from 24-70 or 24-105, and you're looking for a lens that does not compromise on performance in the wide or the narrow, you need to look at that number. The second number is a lot more important. So the 1: or the F number is more important for you to know, so you don't buy a lens that gets compromised for yourself in terms of lighting performance. Obviously, when you're starting out, it doesn't really matter. You're still learning the ropes, but as you're getting better, make sure to have a look at getting the right lens with the right aperture value that you need. Now, in saying that, the number on the lens only tells you how much it can open up, like the biggest it can open. It doesn't tell you how much it can close. The majority of lenses can close down to f16, no issue. Most of your zoom lenses, so I think Donna's and Amanda's and Sashi's and DG Healy's, I think your lenses can close down all the way down to f24 or f30 or something ridiculous. So if you look on the screen here with the candle where it's like at f22, you can see how dark that is. The majority of your lenses will be able to close f22. Now, if your lens has a range, so if it's a 18-55 and it's f4 to 5.6, they can all close the same. So at 18, you can close it down to f22, and 55, you can close it down to f22. The closing of the aperture ring, there's no difference. So no matter if you're shooting wide or dark, you can always close it the same, but you can't open it the same unless your lens has a fixed aperture and will allow it to open up the same amount, no matter if you're shooting wide or narrow. If you guys get a little confused, chuck it in the chat. Any questions in the chat, and I'll answer them for you. And I'll just make it a little bit easier for you to grasp that. So the aperture, the first thing it does, as you see on screen, it controls the amount of light entering your camera via the lens. Juliet, also you have a lens that's f15 to 45 mil, f3.5 to 6.3. So at 15 mil, you can open up your aperture ring to 3.5. And at 45 mil, you can only open it up to 6.3. So just so you know that limitation in the range of your lens. And Juliet, the lens is very versatile in terms of a beginner standpoint, but if you're going out and shooting at night and you decide to zoom into 45, the lighting performance may not be as ideal, but we'll walk through that in a second. Okay, so that's the first thing. So it controls the amount of light that enters your camera. And not only that, the aperture also controls this concept called depth of field, how much of your focus is in focus. So it's all well and good to have a lens that opens up really wide to f2.8 or f1.7 to get really good low light performance. But you also have to remember there's a secondary effect to opening up your aperture as well, and it is called depth of field. So if you have a look at the screen right now, you can see that at f2.8, f8, f16, and f32, you can see there's a big variance in how much is in focus in the frame. So you can see when you're opening up that aperture really wide at f2.8, just remember as well, the smaller the number, the more light you're letting into your camera. So in this regard, you can see they're letting in a lot of light and there's only a tiny bit in focus. Whereas if you've closed the aperture, you get a lot more in focus in your photo. Like in the f16 or the f32, you can see more detail in the lily pads, in the rock face behind it. Now, the reason this happens, how depth of field happens, so when you let your aperture ring open wide, so it lets a lot of light in, the light rays jump in. And when they're bouncing through the optics and elements, when there's so much light in the lens at those smaller aperture numbers, so like f4, f2.8, when you bombard the sensor with that many light rays and through the optics of the lens, it only picks up a little bit of detail, basically what you want on focus. So when you're pressing your camera halfway down on focus, so that little triangle or little square comes up and you shoot it, when you're shooting at those lower aperture numbers, f2.8, f4, f1.8, f1.4, a lot less of the photo is in focus. This is really important to know because the aperture controls the majority of the art of the photo and also affects the purpose of why you're shooting. If you're looking on your cheat sheet that I would have sent, and if you've downloaded it, you can see that there's a man in front of a mountain, and you see that at the lower numbers, you see less of the mountain, more of the person. And as it moves towards the end of the little image graph, you can see that the person and the mountain in the background is in focus. Super important because if you're going to be shooting different things, you want to choose the right aperture value. For example, if you are shooting a portrait, if you're shooting a headshot or a person, you don't want to be shooting at the higher f aperture value. So you don't want to be shooting them at f16. You don't want to be shooting them at f11 because you don't want the whole photo to be in focus. You want the subject to be in focus. You want people, when they look at the photo, to look at the person. That's the main point of shooting a portrait photo. So you want to stick with a lower aperture number. So you want to be using f2.8s, f4, 3.5, 1.8, 1.4, those lower numbers. So as you can see this f2.8 photo on our screen, you see that you can see the lily pad is in focus and that's all you see. Everything else is blurred out. All the distractions in the photo are gone and your focus is just on the subject. So that's really important to know. If you're going to be shooting portraiture, you want to be shooting at those low end numbers. Now, think about that, flip it over. And if you're going to be shooting landscapes, you're out at Bondi Beach, for example, and you want to take a photo of the amazing landscape. You want to take the photo of the city that's on the left of Bondi. And you also want to take a photo of the beach as well and the sand. And you want everything to be in focus. You're not going to be wanting to shoot at f2.8 or f4, because what that would mean that only one portion of your beautiful landscape is in focus, and the whole landscape that you should have been shooting is out of focus. Now, you want to be shooting at the higher aperture numbers. You want to be shooting f11, f16, f18, towards the top end of the aperture scale, so you get more of the subject in focus. Now, aperture is a really kind of like double-edged sword. If you're shooting at, sometimes in scenarios, you want more light in, but the problem is you're going to lose focus. So this is really like, I guess, more prominent with night shooting. So a lot of people, when I used to run our night landscape vivid workshops, when we used to go out to Sydney City during the Vivid Light Show, naturally a lot of people in their head are thinking it's a low light environment where I'm going to want to shoot at f2.8 or I want to shoot at f1.8. And the problem with that is if you are shooting during Vivid, you're most likely shooting a lot of landscapes. So you're shooting the Opera House, you're shooting Circular Quay, Darling Harbour, you're shooting a landscape effectively. You are shooting a landscape which you want all of it or most of it to be in focus. Now, a lot of people in their heads are thinking low light, we're going to shoot f2.8, f1.8. They take the photo and they're like, it looks okay. But then they look at it again, and if they've shot the Opera House and only 2 sails are in focus and the rest of the sails are out of focus. And they get a bit confused because they think that it's just to do with light. But you have to remember it's light and depth of field. Aperture does 2 things. So how to combat that, for example, is people use tripods. So they'll be able to shoot at f8 or f16 at a high aperture value, but to compensate the amount of the light going into the camera, because you're closing it, they shoot at a longer shutter speed. So they shoot at a shutter speed to compensate for the lack of light you're cutting down. So if you're closing the aperture in that scenario, they're letting more light in by letting the shutter open for longer so that the exposure is correct. That'll make a lot more sense in our manual segment of the workshop, but keep that in mind because you don't want to always be shooting at a low aperture, or you don't want to be shooting always at a higher aperture, even though the environment you're in might call you to make that judgment to either let little light in or let more light in through your lens. How I kind of choose my aperture is based off what I'm going to shoot. Think about that more so than the lighting part of the aperture. You want to choose what art you want to shoot. You want to choose whether you're shooting a landscape, whether you're shooting a macro photo of an insect, whether you're shooting a portrait. Choose your aperture based off that, not off the lighting that is available to you or the lighting environment at the time. So what we're going to do now, is we're going to go through a aperture practical exercise. So if you guys wish, turn on your video, unmute your mic. For the next 5 or so minutes, we're going to do a couple exercises. What we're going to do is we're going to shoot with your cameras, if you have them on you. What I'm using as a subject is this lovely bottle. And what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 photos. Now there's a couple of settings that I want you guys to be shooting on in terms of your aperture and everything else. But first off, I want you guys to put your cameras into aperture priority first. So if you are using a Nikon camera, a Sony camera, or a Panasonic camera, you have this dial at the top. I want you guys to put it on A, not the green automatic function. I want you to put it on A. I don't know if you can see that on my camera, but if you look on the screen as well, it's got the A mode. If you are using a Canon camera, I want you to put it on the AV mode. So if you look at the bottom left, sorry, the bottom right, it's got the AV in focus there. Please put it on the AV mode. I'll give you guys a couple of seconds just to do that. So put your camera on A or AV. And once you've got that, you can either write "got it" in the chat or give me a thumbs up if you're on video. Awesome. And then what we're going to do as well, we're going to make sure you have another setting. Awesome. Thanks, guys. That auto ISO is enabled. All of your cameras going to be different. Normally I run this workshop in person and I can go around and kind of look at all your cameras. But you're going to have to work with me on this one. So make sure your camera's on auto ISO if it's not already. To find that on Canon cameras, you should have a button. Oh, Fujifilm camera. Yes, thank you, Amanda. Fujifilm cameras are a little bit different. They don't have a mode dial at all. So on your lens, there should be a little switch that has the circle. So it's like an aperture ring. And then I think the other thing is an A. If not, if you can't find that, Amanda, just turn on your video and show me. But put your switch onto the little circle thing on your lens. And at the top on your shutter dial, where it has, okay, yeah. So don't put it on the A, put it on the circle thing. And on your dial at the top where it's got all your numbers, so it says 4,000, 2,000, 1,000, your shutter numbers, put that on A. So put your lens off A onto the little circle thing. And then on the top of your camera, put the shutter on A. When you have that, just let me know in the chat. Okay, so cool. ISO A, good job, DG Healy. So make sure your your ISO is on auto. For Canon, there should be a little, Tanya, what lens are you using? Is it, it was a prime lens, right? It was a 23 mil. So for Fujifilm, okay, cool. So Tanya, with your lens, you don't have that little circle thing because your lens can actually change aperture on the lens. So correct me if I'm wrong. Your lens will say 16:8:4 to 2.8 or whatever those numbers are, and then it also has a on it. So if your lens is on that A, just take it off. Just rotate the, that ring at the back to like 4 or 2.8 or something temporarily. You don't actually need to do anything. There's no little switch for you. You just need to rotate it. Not sure how to enable ISO. For the Sony people, there should be, I don't remember if there's a Q button at the back of Sony. If not, if you go into your menu, it should be the first or second menu, and you should be able to enable ISO to auto. But from Sony, from memory, there should be a little bar that looks kind of like this at the bottom, and you can change it. Yes, that is correct now. So as long as you're on ISO auto, that is perfect. And Tanya, awesome that you've changed that. So awesome, everyone's on auto ISO. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to get you guys to take 2 images. What I want you to do is grab your object or whatever is around you, whether it's a bottle or whatever else, it's just a single subject, and take 2 shots. The first shot on your aperture, I want you to take it at the widest aperture you can take the photo at. So for you guys, how you change the aperture, some cameras have this wheel here at the front of the camera. It's like a little wheel that you can rotate at the front, or sometimes it's situated at the back here. So you can rotate that. For some Canon cameras, the wheel is located here and you can rotate that left and right. So I want you to rotate it all the way to the left. So the smallest number it can go to, and I want you to take a photo of your subject. Then the second photo I want you to take, I want you to rotate your wheel to the right or wherever else, and I want you to shoot the image at f16. For those who have lenses, such as Tanya, I want you to shoot one photo at f2.8 and the second photo at f16. Just rotate on your lens. You've got those numbers on your lens, so just rotate it to those two numbers. There was one more future user, Amanda. Amanda, same deal. To change your aperture on your lens, you've got a little ring on your lens at the back here on your Fuji lens that you can rotate. So just rotate that all the way to the left, which should be 2.8 if you're shooting at 18 mil, and then shoot it again at f16. Now, what I want you guys to do when you successfully take your two photos, and they're all in focus of the same subject, I want you to compare the two photos. There should be, cool, shoot at f22, why not? Go for it. You can shoot at f22 for one and f2.8 for the other photo, and you can compare the difference. So I want you guys to review both of those photos you just shot. It should be pretty clear that one photo looks a lot more in focus than the other focus. And if you guys can see that, give me a thumbs up or write in the chat that, that you can see that difference. And this is kind of demonstrating what I was talking before about depth of field. Awesome. Good job, guys. And this is super important because sometimes as well, I know that I'm sure you've gone out in situations when you're shooting automatic and you've taken a photo, you've put it in focus and you've revealed your photo again and you realize that it's not in focus. So sometimes it might not be that your camera is not taking the focus incorrectly. That could be one of the reasons, like you've actually misfocused on a subject. But the majority of the time you've taken the focus, you've looked at it again, and you realize that your photos is in focus, but not really. It's probably because of depth of field. Your camera, when it's on auto mode, prioritizes trying to get the photo well exposed, as opposed to getting the focus that you want. It's just a computer. It doesn't really know what you want the image to look like. It's just going to go for what's in focus. Speaking on that, the 4 modes I'm going to go through with you today. So with the shutter speed, I'll go through that in the next part when we go through shutter speed. So with the camera at the top, with the dials, there are some modes that you should never use and modes you should use. And I'm going to go through go through that right now. So first off is M. That's pretty obvious. That's full manual. On Fujifilm cameras, that's when you take your shutter speed off A and you take your lens off A. So if you take those both off A, that means it's in manual mode. The next mode is aperture priority. So what I just demonstrated to you guys. So what that does is when you put your camera on A or AV, or with the Fuji cameras, when you put the lens off A and leave your shutter on A, what that means is that you're choosing the aperture, you choose the depth of field, you choose how much light goes into your camera through your lens, and your camera automatically does the shutter speed for you. It chooses the right shutter speed for the aperture that you've chosen. Now we do that again with S, or on Canon cameras, it's TV. And what that means is you're putting the camera on shutter priority. So you choose the shutter speed. On the Fuji cameras, you put your lens back onto A, and then at the top of your shutter speed, you change that at the top, and that puts it in shutter priority. You choose the shutter speed, the camera does the aperture for you. So which is the opposite of what we've just done in our aperture practical exercise in that mode. And the last mode is P. A lot of people refer to this as P for professional mode, but all this is a programmable auto mode. This is the default auto mode for Fujifilm, but not the default auto mode for Sony, Nikon, Canon, Panasonic. This is the only automatic mode I recommend you guys using. Do not use the green auto button, or on the Fuji at the top, there's normally a switch that you can push down here that puts it in auto. The green auto is by far the most inefficient and the worst mode to use. If you're looking to use an auto mode, use P, because what P is, it actually looks at your environment. It sense checks that with the database that they've loaded already into the processor and into the sensor, which they've programmed to be like, this environment is good for this setting, shoot that. It's a lot more accurate. The only thing P does that the green automatic function doesn't do is it doesn't automatically pop up the flash if your camera has a pop-up flash. Now, the green auto, in some really random scenarios, it will try and use the flash. So, Lorraine, I'll backtrack that for you. Let me know what you want me to re-explain. Amanda, the Fujifilm cameras do not have a P mode because by default, if you put on A at the top and A on the lens, it will shoot on P automatically. The only time that a Fujifilm camera will switch to auto is if you hit the switch at the top, and that does the green default automatic. So the green default automatic function, which most of you would use, I'm assuming, is not the best one because it doesn't really measure what settings are the best for the environment. It will just measure the right settings it thinks will work. And if it doesn't work within that, it'll pop up the flash and it'll shoot the flash to try and compensate for that to make the photo in focus. So what I'm saying from now on, after this workshop, do not use the green auto if you decide to use auto. Put your camera on P, or for the Fuji cameras, put them on A, and that's all. If you need to use the pop-up flash, most of your cameras will have a little lightning bolt, normally situated here, or some Fujis, you can just pop it up by yourself manually. Just press that and the pop-up flash will come up. Pop-up flash is not that great though. It fires a super harsh flash directly in front and it's not very effective. So, main takeaway from all of this, M is full manual. Use AV if you want to choose the aperture and let the camera do the shutter for you. Choose S or TV if you want to choose the shutter speed and let the camera choose the aperture for you. And use P if you can't be bothered doing any of that and just want to shoot automatic. And ignore every single other mode on your camera. So I know some of you guys on your cameras, some of them have a fireworks mode, a landscape mode, a portrait mode, a sports mode. These are all used from camera companies as marketing tools and they don't really do much. What they do for those little special modes is they give those modes a certain parameter of settings that it can use, and that's it. If the subject that you're shooting is outside of those parameters, then it's going to struggle to shoot it anyway. So those modes they only use to kind of make the camera seem more easy to use and more efficient to use, but it's literally just to get like a little advertising marketing ploy to make you feel like the camera is a little bit easier to use. But those presets aren't very good. You can use the seed mode and play around with the black and white and the other cool features like toy camera and like any other things. They're pretty fun to use. But outside of that, always stick to MAS or P or AVTV or P. For the Fuji cameras, by default, you're already on P, so don't worry about that too much. And those basically the four modes you touch. Do not touch anything else because they either don't work or they don't work as well as they should. No worries, Lorraine. I'll try and slow down a little bit. If I have missed something, just chat it to me privately and I'll go through it again, or in the question section at the end, if I've missed out on anything, I'll go through it again. Also, just remember too, we are sending out a recording to everyone. So if at any point you do miss out on something, you'll be able to backtrack it later on. Okay, so the next part, how the photos are produced. So we're back to this first initial image that I went through at the beginning. So with the camera lens, we've just gone through that. So if you look at the lens again, we've just learnt how to control the aperture ring that's inside it, which in this photo, I can't really see. I'm pretty sure it's that middle circle that has the two light rays beaming into. That should be the aperture ring. So we've just learned how to control that, how to open that and close that. to let light into the camera. So after that's done, now we're going to head to the next section. So once that light travels through the lens, it bounces around and goes into your camera, where it touches the mirror or before the sensor, it's going to hit the shutter curtain, which is at that bottom right. You can see that we've got the shutter pointed to that. This is what we're going to learn to control. So we've already learned how to control the aperture in the lens. So the light source in the lens, now we're going to control how we let that light into the camera, which is through your shutter mechanism. So the shutter controls how much light enters your camera after the light rays have moved through the lens. As you can see here on our diagram, oops, sorry, let me go back. As you can see here on our diagram, if you look at those shutter numbers, so you've got 1/250, 1/125, 1/60, 1/30, 15, 8, 4, and 1/2. You can see as the number gets smaller, 1/8, 1/4, 1/2, you can see how much light is entering into camera. The candle and the flame is looking a lot brighter, and there's a lot more going on in this. And then in the 1/250th of a second, you can see how dark the image is. And that's just because the shutter is open a lot. So for 1/250, the shutter closes and opens a lot faster, whereas 1/2 of a second, it opens a little bit more and then it closes. So you can see the aperture, the F number is at f8. They've shot it at f8 for all every single photo in this, and they've left the ISO at 200 for every single photo. The only thing they've changed here is the shutter speed. If you look on your cheat sheet as well, you see the gentleman, as I mentioned earlier, is in focus when you're shooting at the 1/1000th or that high number. And then towards the 1/4, 1/2 section, you can see that the person is not as in focus. You see that there's a little bit of motion behind him. Amanda, I will answer that question when we get to the ISO section, and it's pretty funny. We'll go over that in a second. In terms of the shutter, so that's the first thing it controls. It's pretty obvious. The faster it opens and closes, the less light it lets in. The slower it opens and closes, the more light it lets into the camera. And so the second thing that the shutter does, kind of like the aperture, how you've got the aperture is able to let light in, but the secondary function is the depth of field. The secondary function for a shutter speed is it captures motion. So if you look at this at 1/2, so half a second, if you look on the right-hand side, you see that the water is very flowy. Whereas if you're shooting at 1/125th of a second, which is a little bit faster, you can see that the water droplets are frozen. You can see those individual water droplets, and as you slow down the shutter, you can see it captures more motion. I'm sure a lot of you have seen photos, whether it's vivid or whether you've seen those photos on a highway where cars drive down and the brake lights follow along the road. That's because they've shot at a slower shutter speed. So kind of like on the right-hand side in this demonstration on the screen, you can see it captures flowy motion. So a lot of people who shoot sunrise, a lot of people who shoot landscape, they really like shooting at slower shutter speeds. Reason being, it captures a lot more life because there's some motion, whether it's clouds moving, whether it's a waterfall that's flowing down, whether it's cars, whether it's anything else, showing that little bit of motion going through and capturing that just looks really cool and it looks alive. It's kind of like making your still image move. And a lot of landscapers like shooting in that style. But on the opposite spectrum, there are people who don't like shooting motion. People who shoot, for example, sport. If you're shooting an athlete going from shooting someone playing basketball or someone playing football, you don't want them to be out of focus. You want the motion, like if they're shooting for a hoop, You want their whole body to be in focus. You want the ball to be in focus. You want everything to be stuck. You want to freeze that point of time. And that's when the faster shutter speeds come in very handy. So shooting at 1/125, 1/1000, 1/8000, those super fast shutter speeds will freeze everything in the frame. So this is also really important to note too, because if you're going to be going out and you want to be shooting specific things, you need to know that you're choosing the right shutter speed for that. So Tanya, to answer your question from earlier, when you're saying what is the optimal shutter speed, it also depends on what you're trying to shoot. If you're going to be shooting, I guess, car moving and you want to capture that motion, you want to be shooting at slower shutter speeds. You want to be shooting at, for example, that waterfall. You can see that they've closed the aperture down. So for them to shoot at a half a second shot and for them to get that motion in, they needed to let little light in by shooting f/22 for it to get that motion in for you. So Tanya, for your still shot, that really varies on the environment you're in. Obviously, I don't know what your room lighting is like, but if it's a still shot and the subject's not moving, to be honest, you could probably shoot it at any shutter speed as long as you can keep your hand steady. Or if you've got it on a tripod, you can definitely shoot it at any kind of shutter speed as long as you're still. Handheld, if you're shooting at an aperture of like f2.8 or f4, you could probably get away with shooting at 1/100th of a second, or 1/80 of a second, or something a little bit higher. If your lighting is not as great, you're probably going to be shooting that at the lower 1/50, 1/40 shutter speeds. We'll go through that a little bit later when we go into our manual exercise. But it varies. It varies a lot. Like sometimes you could be in a room and, you know, you could have a sunset go through within like the next 5 minutes and it changes really quickly. Best thing to do is if you're shooting still shots like for product and stuff like that, it's probably better to use a tripod. But if it's handheld, you need to work with what you've got more so than get away with it using any shutter speed on a tripod. For vagabonds, what about the aperture on these waterfalls? Yes, it does say at the top there. So f/22, f/10, and f2.8. And you can see that in the f2.8 shot, you can see that there is, you can't really see it too closely, but the water at the bottom, if they had shot that photo at the same, you could instantly tell that the depth of field on those droplets is immediately when it touches is not as in focus. Obviously, in this scenario, you can't really tell because they've shot the shutter speed a little bit longer in the f/10, f/22 photo. So it looks like it's all blurry, but that's because they've captured the motion. It's not because the photos are blurry. It's because they've done a bit of motion capturing instead of just getting everything in crisp, sharp focus. Okay, so that's the shutter speed. So remember 2 things. First thing, controls how much light goes into your camera, not through your lens. That's what your aperture does, but through your camera from the light source of the lens, and it captures motion as well. When you choose a slower shutter speed, it'll capture more motion than it does on a higher shutter speed. So, same thing. If you want to unmute your mic, turn on your camera and do this exercise, or if you don't wish to, just please interact with me in chat so I know kind of where you're at. I want you guys to shoot 2 images, but the first thing to do, sorry guys, is to put your camera onto S or put your camera onto TV mode if you have Canon. Leave your ISO on auto. So if you were playing around last time, don't change your ISO yet. Leave that as auto. I want you guys to put your camera on TV or on S. For the Fujifilm people, put your lens back onto A, and then at the top of your shutter dial, you can rotate that. So make sure your lens is on A, and then rotate your shutter to 1/250 and 1/10. Now, try and find something moving. If you have a fan, or if there are cars outside, or even if you just kind of get an object like your lens cap and just move it around in front of you on your table and try and shoot that, do that. And I want you to shoot 2 photos of the same moving subject, just so you can see the difference. Normally, in a in-person workshop, I would jump and then you guys take photos of me for this. But because we can't do that, you're going to have to try and find anything in front of you that moves. Amanda, which camera do you have? Is it a XT3? Is it XT20, XT30? Just so I can kind of have... Okay, so you've got 2 dials, I'm pretty sure, on top. The left dial is your ISO dial, which has like 100, 400, 800, 1600. Now, I think the dial on your right is your shutter dial. So that should have 8,000, 4,000, 1,000. There should be like those numbers on your right side. Can you confirm that that is there for me? Okay, so that dial is your shutter speed dial. So make sure to put your lens back on A and then just change the top right dial and shoot those 2 photos. So if you don't have 250, because I don't remember what the Fuji divisions of the numbers are. If you don't have 250, shoot at 200 or somewhere close to there, and then shoot at 1/10. Or if you don't have 1/10, shoot at 1/8 or a different number. And let me know, guys, when you've taken your 2 photos, and let me know if you can see that there is a little bit of motion blur or difference. Sony A or S? Sony on S. S for shutter. So put that on S, Lorraine, and then shoot your 2 photos and let me know when you've shot those 2 photos for me. Okay. I'll give you guys, thanks, Tanya. I'll give you guys a little bit of time to do that because finding a movie subject might be a little bit hard at the moment. Works pretty well on a fan if you do have a fan, whether it's a ceiling fan or a floor fan. Turn that on and then take your 2 photos and then you can see the difference. Looks pretty cool. For now, so I'll let you guys have a couple minutes because I'm sure some of you might be walking to a window or whatever, taking your photo. So far, do you guys have any questions so far up to this? So to do with aperture, shutter, or anything else? Cool. Good job, Vagabonds. Maybe your subject would have been better frozen at a 1/1000 shutter, for example. But as long as you can see the difference between the motion captured, that's great. Just out of curiosity, what did you guys shoot? just so I know what you guys were ended up choosing for your moving subject. Because this, when I was coming up with the workshop plan for this segment that I normally jump for, I was like, what will people shoot now? On the Fuji, cool. On the Fuji, it has an X after the 250. On the shutter speed, what does that mean? Good question, Tanya. So the X250, if you're using a flash on your camera, a pop-up flash, not pop-up flash, an external flash, or you're using a flash controller to trigger studio lights, the Fuji can do a flash sync speed of up to 1/250 natively, which will means that with flashes that can sync that fast at 1/250, you can shoot that natively at 1/250. It's just saying I think that's the top flash sync speed that you can shoot on a Fuji. And then obviously any other below that. Awesome. Ceiling fan, you can see the difference. Neelan, does that mean S mode might be better for capturing motion? Yes. If you're not using manual, I think S would probably be the easiest because you can just choose the shutter speed that you want. I personally, if I'm shooting motion, obviously I'm going to be shooting on M because I kind of understand how to shoot manually after doing it a lot more. But I'm sure you guys after this will understand that a little bit more. Amanda, I reckon if you can't see the difference, it either means you have extremely steady hands or the subject that you're shooting is going very slow. So what I would advise in that case then shoot your slower photo still at 1/10, but your your other subject, shoot it at like 8,000 or 4,000, and then see if you can make a difference. Awesome. Works with waving a pen around. I didn't even think about using a pen. A pen would be a great idea. If you just wiggle your pen in front and shoot it at those 2 shutter speeds, you'll see the difference pretty quickly. And yes, using a fan, awesome. The fan will help a lot to for you to see the difference. But anyway, Neelam, back on that. I think if you're starting out, shooting at S will be easier for the motion, because you can just choose the right shutter speed that you want to see the motion difference. My only issue with shooting on S is that I like choosing the aperture, so choosing what the art of the photo, like the depth of field. I find that a little bit more important. So I will prioritize choosing the aperture, which is why I will be shooting on manual most of the time, so that I can choose both variables. But yes, you can effectively, out of the 2 modes, if you're going to choose between AV and TV or A and S, definitely S if you're going to try and capture motion. I remember starting out when I was shooting initially, that was where I kind of started to understand motion. And in saying that, I totally forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. Normally, what I do at the beginning of workshops, I like to introduce myself and kind of go through my photography background and stuff. But now that we're online, I've totally completely forgot to do that. So my name's Andrew. You may have seen me on our George's Cameras TV YouTube channel. I used to host the channel and do all the reviews for. What my photography background is, funny story. When I started out, initially I had a strong hobby in skateboarding. I had no interest in photography at all until my 4th year of skateboarding. Thanks Juliet, I fractured my ankle and I was out of action for 6 months. And I did not know what to do at home. This was the period between my HSC and my 1st year of uni, and I literally had nothing to do. So what I did was I picked up my dad's camera and I would shoot random things around the house. It was like tissue boxes, random figurines and random things around the house. And to be honest, I found that really fun to do. And from then on, I self-taught myself how to shoot basically everything because I was so bored at home. And that's how I started taking photos. It's not really a really cool story, but that's how I got there. I was at George's for 4 years, working in sales, working in marketing, doing their content. And now I help out, teach some workshops for you guys. So cool. We're gonna move on to the next section of the workshop now. So just to rehash really quickly, we've learned 2 things. First is the aperture, which is letting how much light goes in through your lens. Second is your shutter, which is letting how much light goes into your camera by the shutter curtain inside your camera. So those are both physical light sources that you're controlling. The amount of physical light sources, that's how much the aperture and the shutter control. So just remember that physical light sources is what those 2 elements control. And Lorraine, I used to be at the Sydney CBD store. I don't work for George's anymore. I only work for them when I'm running workshops or doing other events with them. And then the last thing is the sensor. So if you look on your camera, the light has bounced through your lens. It's bounced through your camera. You've opened up the shutter curtain and it touches the sensor, which is the thing that sits behind it. And this is what produces your photo. Now, going back 20 years ago, or not even that far, maybe 15 years ago, this used to be a roll of film. And what happens is that light source on the film, it'll burn into that roll of film and that will produce your photo. Now, in the digital age, that light source touches your sensor and that produces your photo. There's a little computer that reads all the data from the light source that has touched your sensor. And from then on, it will produce a photo, pump it out onto your screen, pump it out onto your viewfinder, and that's it. So what the sensor does is when it produces the photo, this is where the ISO comes in. Now, if you remember, for those just quickly in the chat, did anyone use film, whether it's a disposable camera or they had a film camera as well and bought film for it? Let me know if you guys used film cameras, because ISO is the same concept in digital as in film. So if you remember buying film for your film camera, 400 would be considered daylight film, or ISO 100 or ISO 200 would be considered daylight film, or the majority of your disposable cameras use daylight film. And that's exactly right what it is, DG. The film speed was very important. So you would choose the right film speed and the right ISO for that environment. And if you were using if you're shooting at night, you would buy an ASA or an ISO film of 800 or 1600. And so what they've done with digital cameras is they've converted that ISO film speed into a digital format, and you have all of that available to you. You do not need to be buying 400 ISO film to shoot during the day, because your camera has 2 buttons that you could just literally go to and change that to have a 400 ISO speed, which makes it a lot cheaper for you, and also, I guess, a lot more efficient. So that's all the ISO is. Now, to answer Amanda's question before of what ISO stands for, this is still a long debate that has gone on for years, and nobody knows what it stands for. ISO technically stands for International Standards Organization, and it measures a lot of things. I think ISO, in camera sense, measures how sensitive it is to light, but people also use ISO numbers to measure other things as well. So I have no idea why no one has just come out and have decided to just be like, call it film speed or FS or something, which would make a lot more sense. But still to this day, nobody knows why it is called ISO and why it's still International Standards Organization. So to answer your question, nobody knows. Nobody knows exactly why or what it stands for and why it's called that, because it will make a lot more sense if people just change it. So ISO controls how sensitive your light source is. Internet speed option. It's definitely not internet speed option or internal speed option. That would actually make a lot more sense if it was internal speed option. But no, still International Standards Organization. But maybe, Juliet, you should pitch to the camera heads to change it to internal speed option, because that would be a lot better, especially for me, who teaches these kind of things. It makes it a lot more simpler. So going through ISO, grab your cheat sheet really quickly if you've got it. Otherwise, you can refer to the screen, works as well. You can see that ISO, it controls how sensitive it is to the light source, which means that if you shoot at a higher ISO, it will actually make the camera more responsive to the light source you've exposed it to. So if in your aperture and your shutter speed, you've let a little bit of light in, but you've made your ISO really high, like 6400, 3200, it will be really sensitive to that. So it might even come out perfectly exposed, even though you've let a little bit of light in. Vice versa, if you let a lot of light into your camera, if you make your ISO really low, so like 100 or 200, and it becomes less sensitive to that, then it could also come out as a nicely exposed photo. So the ISO, although not as important as the other two in terms of how much physical light it enters in, it does make a big difference when it comes to making a photo, making your final product, because you can have varying light sources. You can have a weak light source and make it look good, or you can have a really strong light source and make it look like it's not a strong light source. And that sensitivity is all it does. It just controls how much, how strongly it takes in those light rays. And this comes with a secondary effect. Like with everything else I've taught you today, it comes with a secondary effect, and that is noise. And noise is not a good thing. So when you're shooting at higher ISO, so kind of like what's considered a high ISO is anything that's above 3200 generally. Most cameras nowadays can handle noise a lot better than they could 5 years ago, but there's just still something that you'll need to keep in mind, because if you are a person who wants your photo to be printed and blown up, or if you want it to edit it a little bit more, choosing the right ISO is quite important. So if you have a look on these photos in front of you, you see at 3200, 6400, 1200, 2500, 50,000, you can see that there's those little dots. I don't know if you guys can see that. So in 50,000, it's quite obvious. You can see that there's dots all around the sky and pretty much across the whole photo. And as you start moving down to 3200, you don't see those dots as much. They're still there. You can see the clouds not exactly super clear and the sky is still a little bit bumpy. But you can see as you're pumping those ISOs up and up and up, there's a lot more noise. What noise is, do not confuse this with grain, which is really nice in film. It looks fantastic. I think grain looks great in your photo. Noise is not so nice. If we were to zoom in this photo a lot further, if you're in Photoshop or in Lightroom, you can see that the dots actually have multiple colors. So they can be red, green, blue, or like yellow even. And what this is pollution. It's noise. It's what our camera captures in the air. It's a bit of mix of light pollution, and it captures electromagnetic spectrum as well. So when your sensor is so sensitive to the light, it starts picking up radio waves, starts picking up UV, starts picking up everything else that's in the air, and it comes up onto your photo, which is effectively pollution. So if you're looking at your photo and you want it to be super nice and you don't want it to be like noisy, and then when you're editing you want it to be a lot more clean, you don't want to be shooting at higher ISOs. Even though it might be beneficial in a low light environment to take your ISO up to, 3200 or 6400 to make that light source even more sensitive, and to get that bigger result, it will probably come up with noise. Now, I know with a lot of cameras, it's all different. So I can't give you a specific range that works best for your camera. Generally, with any camera, between ISO 100 to 1600, like the lower parts of the camera will work fine. I think they're quite universal throughout in terms of the lower aspect of the ISO. So anywhere between like 100, 800, 100, 1600, you should be pretty safe no matter what camera you use. It's just how well the camera can handle noise in the higher ISOs varies from camera to camera. So what I would advise after this workshop and after you've had time to, relax a little bit after getting all this information thrown at you, I would Google your camera and look at what are the best ISOs to use it at. Because I would say all your cameras that you have, someone's definitely done an ISO stress test on it, and you can have a look at that and know which ISOs to avoid, and know which one, or know how which ones behave at certain lighting conditions, because they're all different. In the lowest part, not so much. The high part, definitely a big difference. Now, I know the people in the call who have Sony A7s, you can probably push it to 3200 and 6400 and it won't look bad at all. Most Sony cameras have that high threshold in terms of noise. But I know the Canon cameras, you probably can't push it that high. You probably can only push it to about 1600 and 3200 if you're really desperate. But that, with technology getting better every day, with sensor technology advancing, that ISO top threshold is going to get better as we go along. In the next 5 years, ISO 6400 could be considered a low ISO, and a high could be 102,000 or something like that. But for the time being, just do a quick research after this and look up what your camera is capable of and which ranges you should work with. So that's how you that's basically the differences in ISO. And to change ISO, where you guys went to change your ISO to auto, or where that is, if you just click that, you can roll that through and you can change your ISO. For the people who are in Fujifilms, if you have an X-T1, 2, 3, or 4, you have a dial on the top left. That's your ISO. So you can just easily change that. For other people who have high-end cameras, like I'm pretty sure the Sony A7s have an ISO button, or a Nikon or a Panasonic, There is a ISO button. Sometimes it's at the back. My one is at the top, and you can press that and you can change the ISO. If you don't have a button, if you don't have a dial, you can just change that through the menu quite easily. It's normally a quick menu accessible item. So if you have a Canon or a Nikon camera, sometimes there's a Q button that you can press, or if your camera has a touch screen, you just touch the ISO and you can change it that way. That works too. So just give me a second. As I said before, I can't give you exact numbers for your camera, but this might be something to write down. I'll give you a rough guide, which will work for, I'd say, 80% of cameras in terms of the ISO range. Daytime usage, if you're going out like a day like this, and you're going out to shoot, any ISO between 100 to 400 is good, as a good number to use for your daylight shooting. For your overcast shooting, so if you're shooting sunrise, sunset, where there's still a bit of light, but not too much light, anything between 1800 to 1600 is a good range to shoot that for. And just a note, this is just for handheld shooting. So no tripods. This is just if you were to go out and take a happy snap. This is the numbers I'd work with. And then the top ISO numbers, if we're shooting nighttime, 3200 to 6400 will be the top end nighttime ISOs to use. Like I said, rough guide will work for the majority of the cameras. May not be the correct one for your camera, but is quite universal, I would say. And even for cameras, if you were to pick up a camera now or a camera 5 years ago, 10 years ago, those would be the numbers I'd still work with. And even for film, if you're looking at buying film, these are good numbers to work off as well. So if you're going to go daylight, 6 to 100 to 400. And if you're going in that overcast kind of time, sunrise or sunrise sunset, 800 to 1600. And if you're going nighttime, 3200 to 6400 are the two numbers. There's no numbers in between them. If your camera has numbers in between them, then you can use them. You have more range to use it from. But they're normally just doubled from 100 all the way up. But if your camera does have this little bit of extra ISO ranges, that's awesome to use as well. But they're kind of the ranges that you would work between. All right, cool. I'm going to give you guys a short break because that was probably a lot of information. For the next 4 minutes, 5 minutes or so, if you have any questions, pump it in. If you want to go to the bathroom, if you want to grab some water, do so. We're going to be going into our manual segment straight after the break. So to answer Lorraine's question, the nighttime range was 3200 to 6400. And from when is a tripod necessary? Which is a very good question. Lorraine, keep that question. I'll keep that question in the back of my head. And I will answer that during the manual segment for you. So you have a better understanding. Once I explain the how to work your camera in full manual, it'll make a little bit more sense on why you would use a tripod. Cool. Does anyone else have any other questions? Will I be talking about shooting video? Julia, if I have time, if I finish up the manual segment, I can answer some questions about video for sure. Definitely. What is the best aperture range for shooting portrait in handheld? Depending on your, do you want it for your specific lens or just any lens, Tanya? Because for your specific lens, anywhere between f2.8 to 5.6, and any lens anywhere between 1.4 to 5.6. So if you get a prime lens that can open up a little bit further, you can do that. Normally like a good rule to work with, that I normally work with, if your lens can open up to f2.8, for example, or f1.4, I always stop one down from what it can open to. So your lens is 2.8, you're 16 to 55. So I would shoot at the one up from that, which is 3 point whatever. Don't stop from shooting at 2.8 because the depth of field effect from 2.8 looks good. But if you want the sharpest photo at the minimum aperture, I always stop down one up from there. On the Fuji X-T4 dial, there is no 10. So how do you get 1/10? So if you can't get 1/10, shoot 1/15 or 1/8. Amanda, the shutter speeds vary from company to company. So they won't always have the numbers that I guess I list. They all work off different numbers. So go off a number similar to that if you want to work on that exercise again. What size and type of SD card do you recommend? Awesome question. For video or for photos? For that. Both. Okay, cool. So if you're shooting JPEGs, you can get away with thousands of images on a 16 or 32 gigs, so quite small cards. If you want a card to do both video and photo, I normally recommend 64 gigs. So this is the card I recommend. It's a SanDisk Extreme Pro, 64 gig. So the SanDisk 64 gig Extreme Pro, if you're shooting in JPEGs, you'll get way too many. But if you shoot in RAW, you'll get, I think you get like close to 800 photos or 700 photos on a full frame camera. So that's a lot of photos in RAW, and in video you get about 3 hours in full HD or something ridiculous like that. So I recommend that. And the range of card is the Extreme Pro series from SanDisk. I've had the least amount of failures with this card than any other card I've had. And not that anyone's going to be traveling anytime soon, but if you do travel with your camera, the SanDisk Extreme Pro is X-ray proof, which is really important, so that when it goes through the custom scanning, it doesn't get affected. Although some cards don't immediately get affected by the X-ray machine, they do degrade over time a lot faster than the Extreme Pro. So if you are a keen traveler, I would not choose any other card other than the SanDisk Extreme Pro. I feel like they're the most reliable at the moment. I've used other kind of alternative grade brand cards with the same grade as the Extreme Pro, and I've still had failures with those. But the Extreme Pro, barely. And they have lifetime warranty anyway, and they come with card recovery software if they do fail, but I haven't used it yet over my many years of shooting. So they're pretty good. And good to hear, Sharon. Thank you. All right. So we will continue the workshop. And this is the most exciting part of it because you're going to be shooting manual, and it's very intimidating, but we'll get through it together. So with manual, you kind of have a rough understanding of what the functions do. So aperture, that's the amount of light into your lens, controls depth of field. Shutter speed controls how much light goes into your camera, and also controls the motion element of the photo. And finally, the ISO, and the ISO controls how sensitive your camera is to that light source, which is the kind of last thing before it produces a photo. So this is my method of shooting manual. It is not the method of shooting manual. I don't know if there is a particular way that people teach to shoot manual, but this is the way I've found easiest over kind of many years of experimenting around different methods. I think this methodology is the easiest and it works. So I'm sharing with you today. This is how I shoot my manual photos. I'm sure there are other people that shoot like this in the world. I highly doubt I'm the one over however many million billion people there are on the planet, but this is just the kind of method I've come up with for shooting manual. So I like to go through the same thing, the same 3 steps, except kind of I start with the ISO first. And I'll explain why I choose the ISO first. So the ISO, I think, is the easiest of the 3 settings to choose. Because let's say you're about to go out for a shoot. You're about to step off the bus onto the beach, or you're about to walk outside. You kind of already know what the lighting environment is like. If you're going for a bushwalk or wherever else, you know what the lighting is going to be like, whether it's sunny, whether it's nighttime, whether it's raining. You'll know which ISO to choose. So say, for example, a day like today, let me just open the blinds. I don't know if it looks like this for you anywhere else in Sydney or wherever you are in Australia, but Currently, right now, outside my house, it's quite sunny. It's quite clear. So I will normally just walk out. If I'm going to be shooting out in the garden, I'll choose ISO 100. Choose that, and I'll forget about it. Or if there's a little bit of clouds in, like it's clear and there's a little bit of clouds, maybe I'll shoot at ISO 200 or 400. But I know it's daytime and I have a lot of light. I'll choose one of the ISOs between my daytime range, which I would have given you guys a couple minutes ago. So that's it. I select that, I forget about it, and that's it. I don't really think about the ISO again unless the light changes, unless there's a sunset, unless it switches to nighttime and I'm still out. But that's the easiest one to pick because you're just picking basing off the lighting environment. The second thing is your aperture. I decide this by prioritizing the depth of field that I want. And this is based off what subject I'm shooting. If I'm shooting a portrait, I will be shooting at the lower aperture ranges. If I'm shooting a landscape, I'm going to be shooting at the higher aperture ranges. I won't be touching, if I'm shooting a landscape, I won't be shooting at f4. If I'm shooting a landscape, if I'm shooting a portrait, I won't be shooting at f16. So I already kind of know what numbers I want to work with by knowing what subject I'm going to shoot. And that's how I choose my aperture. Nice and simple. And the shutter speed, I don't even think about. And it's a little bit controversial, but I don't even think about the shutter speed. The only thing I use my shutter speed for is to balance out my two other settings I've chosen. So I've chosen the ISO and I've chosen my aperture. The only thing I do with the shutter speed is to choose the right shutter speed to make sure that my photo comes out with the right depth of field that I want and the right ISO at the ISO setting that I chose. So I literally only use the shutter speed to balance out my other two settings so that I can get a good photo. And how I do that to balance out is I use the light meter in the camera. So I want you guys all to turn on your cameras and turn on your webcam as well, so I can kind of see you guys working at this. And if you have problems finding any of these elements, let me know. So before we switch our cameras into M mode or go into full manual mode, what I want you to first identify is where your light meter is. I've got examples on the right there of what they look like. Some cameras will say -2, -1, have that 0, and then 1 and +2, like that diagram at the top, could go up to -4 or -5. Some cameras below will have this. We'll just say plus, have 2 dots and a 0. So the dots in this is 1. So each dot represents 1. So if we look at that middle photo, if we go on that overexposure graph, that dot, the first dot on the left is -2. The second dot is -1. Then the number 0. And then the next dot is +1. And then the dot after that is +2. So it's basically like the image that you're looking at above with the descriptors that says your light meter is inside your viewfinder. And to find those two, you literally are looking through the eyepiece up here to get those. So if you look in and you focus your photo, most cameras will have it at the bottom. You can see it at the bottom. Once you focus on your subject, it'll come up at the bottom and it will have a line at the bottom to indicate if your photo is underexposed or overexposed. For some cameras, that is on the side. So it could be on the left side or the right side. I know some Fuji cameras have it alongside the left and the right side for their light meter in the viewfinder. And the last place is if you don't shoot using the viewfinder and you're more of a screen shooter, at the bottom for the Nikon one there, which is a screen grab of a typical Nikon DSLR, you can see that it's got the light meter at the bottom there below the shutter speed that says 1/1000, and where it says f10, there's a light meter below that. At the moment in this current screenshot that I've taken, that is that little line there is on 0, which means that the photo is perfectly exposed. Refer to the graph above that. You can see that in overexposure, it goes all the way to the plus side. This one's in reverse. I know some cameras, and I think most of your cameras, the underexposure is actually on the left. So your -2, -1 is actually on the left, or your minus is on the left. some cameras, the minus is on the right. I have no idea why they do that, but just make sure plus is overexposed. So it means your photo is going to be brighter. Minus means it's going to be darker, and 0 is when it's perfect. So if you get your photo, if you focus and your little line is on that 0, like in the top, bottom, and in that Nikon graph that I have at the bottom, if it's on that line at the bottom of the 0 is there, it means your photo is going to be perfectly exposed. And you will have a good looking photo. And that's really it. So can everyone in chat or give me a thumbs up if they've found the light meter in their camera? Whether in the viewfinder or whether it's on the screen, just let me know that you found that, because it's really important that you know where that is, because for the next part, you're going to be using it. Thanks, DG. Amanda, yes. I saw Nilan said it. Sashi found it. Awesome. As long as you've all found it, that's good. Is 0 perfect? Why other numbers? Okay, good question, Lorraine. Juliet, when you get your camera, watch this again and try it out. Lorraine, if 0 is perfect, why are there other numbers? Very good question. So why are there numbers that says -1, -2, and +1 and +2? Basically, this shows you how many stops your image is overexposed or underexposed. So in some scenarios, you kind of want to know how much brighter your photo is from where it should be. And so they've, in photography terms, stops are kind of like how much like increments it is, over, under, or kind of well exposed. So your light meter kind of tells you that the settings that you have. So let's say that your little line at the bottom is at -2. Your camera is telling you that your ISO, aperture, and shutter speed settings right now are too dark. Like they're 2 stops underexposed. So you need to change things to make it go into 0, to make it perfect. So the other numbers are there as a guide to kind of help you change your settings so that you can get to 0. Some people also like to shoot their photos underexposed by 1 stop or overexposed by 1 stop. So having those numbers there are a good guide so that people can easily do that. Okay. The task is not freezing motion, but the task is to shoot a still image again of your subject. So remember, with our aperture subject, we're going to use the app, whatever you're shooting again, whether it's a bottle or whatever it is on your desk, we're going to be shooting that again. So I'm going to work with you guys on this, and I want you guys to give me the settings. So please type it out in chat, and then I will say yes to that, and we'll go from there. So going through my method, let's go back. We're going to choose our ISO first to shoot our subject. So I'm assuming most of you will be shooting a bottle or something on your table. So I want everyone to give me an ISO number to shoot the bottle right now inside your room. Now, obviously, I don't know what your lighting environment is in your room, but just chuck some numbers at me and I'm going to say yes or no. 250, 400, 800. Cool. On M, yes. So also, everyone put your cameras onto M mode. For the Fujis, take your cameras off A for the lens and the shutter. So take them both off A. Okay, so I have a lot of different numbers going through here. Now, obviously, all of us aren't in the same room and we all have different lighting conditions in our room. So to be safe, I honestly think all of the numbers that you've given me are workable. Amanda, it sounds like your room is very bright, but just to be safe, so we all work off the same number, I'm going to take an average from all your numbers and we're going to go with 400. So everyone put your ISO on 400 for me, if you can. So please, whether it's a dial or whether it's a menu, put your ISO on 400 for me. I've just taken an average of all your numbers. I'm sure all of those numbers would have worked, but just so we're all on the same page, put it on 400. And let me know when you've done that. Either thumbs up, either done. Awesome. Thanks, Tanya. Cool. Cool. All right. Everyone's on 400. So after this, I want you guys to choose your aperture. So just remember, we are shooting a single subject. So we're not shooting a landscape. It's more of kind of like a portrait scenario or a product scenario. So give me some aperture numbers that you can shoot at. 4. Awesome. I think 2.8. Tanya, you can shoot at 2.8 if you want. I think if everyone else's lenses can't shoot at f2.8, shoot at f4. So Tanya, you can stick to 2.8. If anyone else wants to shoot lower than 2.8 or at 2.8, that is fine if your lens has that capability. Otherwise, f4 is a good amount. So put your lenses onto that setting. So on M, now, if your camera has one wheel, can anyone type in the chat if they've only got one wheel or don't know how to change their aperture in manual mode? It's two ways to do this. Depending on your camera, the aperture is either the wheel here or the wheel at the top. Or for the Fuji cameras, it's just on your lens. So you can just rotate that. Donna, what camera do you have? So I know my camera. Nikon, what model? Nikon. Okay, D3500. Your camera should have a plus or minus button. I don't remember if it's at the top or if it's at the back. But if you push that plus or minus button and rotate the wheel that's at the back of your camera, I think it's either at the back or the front, you can change the aperture when you're holding that button down. When you let go of that button and you rotate the same wheel, it changes your shutter speed. Let me know when you've done that. So has everyone changed their aperture to the right amount? Just hit done if you have, or thumbs up. Awesome. Good job, Donna. Yep. Yes. Awesome. Nilan, have you set your aperture as well? Lorraine, awesome. Tanya, yes. Sashi, done. Cool. So, okay. So once we've got our apertures, so we've changed two things. Our ISO to 400 and your aperture, you've either chosen f4 or any number below that. And now what we're going to do is shoot your first perfectly exposed photo. So what I want you guys to do is focus on your subject, right? And you'll have your numbers, and the bar at the bottom is either going to be on the left or the right in terms of like the little line below it. And it's going to tell you where your image is over or underexposed. What I want you guys to do now is rotate your wheel to choose your shutter speed so that that little bar moves towards 0 and so that it's on 0. So to make it easier for you, if you're focusing and your bar is all the way to the left, after choosing your ISO and your aperture settings, that just means your shutter speed is too quick. So it's not letting enough light into your camera. So if your bar is on the left, choose a shutter speed that will move it towards 0, which would mean that you need to shoot a slower shutter speed to let more light into your camera if it's all the way to the left. Opposite, if it's all the way on the right, which means it's too bright, you need to shoot at a faster shutter speed. So like the higher numbers, so like 100 or 200, wherever it may be, and then push that back to 0. Good job, DG. So you got your first photo at 125 in your room. Good job. Congratulations. That is your first manual photo, I think. Everyone else, shoot that one photo at when you hit the 0. And you get onto that 0. 1/100. Awesome. Cool. Let me know when you guys have shot your first photo in manual mode. Good job, Amanda. Tanya, good job. Donna, good job. And there you go. So it's not that difficult to shoot in manual. And as long as you know what your ISO, good job, Lorraine. So you shot at 1/120 to get your settings. So guys, good job. You've shot your first manual photo. How easy was that? And that's how you shoot manual. So that's kind of my method. So you choose your ISO, choose your aperture, and then your shutter speed just balances out those two settings. Now, what I want you guys to do now is take the same shot of whatever you were shooting, but now get it to one stop underexposed and one stop overexposed. So on your light meter, get that bar down to -1, shoot the photo, get that bar to +1, shoot the photo. And I want you to compare all three images so you can see the differences. Let me know when you've shot those 3 photos in the chat. Just hit done and let me know if you see a difference between those 3 photos, because you probably will. So just work off your original shutter speed, whether you're shooting it fast. So shooting it faster to get that underexposed, shooting it slower to get the overexposed photo. Let me know when you guys have shot those 3 photos or 2 photos on top of your optimal photo. Awesome, big difference. Good job, guys. And I'm sure you can now see that you've got your 3 different photos. Lorraine, to answer your question, why you would need a tripod and why it's important. And it's for this reason. So if you were shooting at night, for example, nighttime's probably the easiest example I can give you. If you're shooting a landscape at night or an environment where there's not too much light, let's say you're shooting the Opera House and it's f11. You want to shoot at f11 or f16 because you want to get the Opera House and the water and the fairies in focus. So you've set up your tripod, you've got your camera, you've chosen your ISO at ISO 400, for example. Because for the ISO, if you're shooting at nighttime, naturally you want to shoot at higher ISOs, but if you have a tripod, you can shoot at lower ISOs. That doesn't really matter. Because your shutter speed can compensate for the ISO and aperture on a tripod. So when you're on a tripod, you've got a low ISO, high aperture, and then when you measure it, you can shoot at a shutter speed that's even longer. So you can shoot like 20 seconds, 30 seconds, or 1 minute. Obviously, if you're shooting handheld, it's really hard to hold your camera for a minute and not shake. So having that on a tripod, you can shoot at those super long exposure times, which you normally can't do handheld. So for situations where you need to close down the aperture, like at night, to shoot a landscape at f11 or whatever, you can have your shutter speed open up to like 2 minutes, 3 minutes to get the perfectly exposed photo, to make sure that light meter goes back to 0, even in the toughest of lighting conditions. So that's why you need a tripod, to basically get you to shoot longer shutter speeds without you being able to physically do that yourself. Alternatively, another good thing about a tripod is your framing is always going to be the same every single time. Amanda, why is there 2 of each photo when I play them back? You might have it on a burst shooting mode, I think. So you might be shooting at a mode that's shooting multiple photos at a time to do that, or like a 4K burst thing. So make sure to just put it on single shooting. I think on the XT4, there is a dial at the bottom here. Just put it back to the single rectangle square. And then it shouldn't be doing that anymore. You should only be shooting 1 photo at a time. Cool, guys. So that's how you shoot manual. Congratulations. All of you now have shot your manual photos. You should be super proud of yourself. And I expect from now on that you're only going to be shooting manual outside of this and nothing else. Because if you do decide to get off manual, now I understand it's going to be a little bit hard at first, especially in a time like this where we can't really go out as much as we'd like to. You won't have enough time to practice. But what I do recommend after this, even if you're not shooting manual, shooting even on aperture priority or shutter priority is good. So your A or your AV mode, your TV or your S modes, just using those modes to help you kind of still have an element of manual so that you understand what it does. And as you get better, you're going to get off those modes and you're probably going to shoot permanently manual when you're getting faster. Obviously, in an environment like this, it's controlled. We have time. we can slow it down and do things like this. But if you're out shooting a wedding, like your family's wedding, or if you're out shooting like a whale that's just popped up and you know that you don't have the ability to quickly do that, even just putting to aperture priority, choosing the right depth of field is a long way. And from there, you can get better. And once you're faster, you can basically shoot manual permanently. But the good thing about manual is because the camera doesn't know, in some scenarios, like you could shoot a perfectly exposed photo and it might not look that great. You might be like, this photo might look a little bit better darker, or it might look a little bit better brighter. Now you know how to do that. You can change the shutter speed to compensate for your two settings, and you'll be able to get that little bit brighter photo, that little bit darker photo, or that photo that is perfectly exposed. Awesome, guys. So that's it. That's how you shoot manual. That's the end of my beginner photography workshop. I hope you guys learned a lot. And to quickly cover, I think somebody had I think it was Juliet. You had a question about video. What was the specific question about video? If you guys need to go, definitely go. Thank you so much for joining in today. Thank you so much for supporting George's. I hope you learned a lot and shooting manual from now on. But if you have any last minute questions, please stick by. I'll hang around for another couple minutes to answer any questions. And until then, I'll see you at the next workshop. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Neelan. Thanks, everyone. Setting for live streaming. Okay, Juliet. So if you are going to be doing video for live streaming, firstly, your camera needs to be able to do a clean HDMI output. Google if your camera can do that, because if your camera can't output a clean HDMI output, when you're live streaming, it'll come up with the settings. So if you can, perfect. So if you can do a clean HDMI output, balance the settings like you would have done today. So you'll be using the aperture and ISO, but the only setting I would change. So you know how I taught you for the photos today, that you choose your ISO aperture, balance out with your shutter speed. It's actually different this time around. So you choose your aperture and you choose your shutter speed, but you change your ISO for video. It's a little bit different. So because you're in Australia, we use PAL, which means that we output at, it's 25 frames per second on most of our monitors, or 25 hertz on most of our monitors. So when you're choosing your shutter speed, you have to put it at 50, 1/50. So you have to put it at 50 so that it doesn't, how our lights and our electricity work, if you choose any other setting outside of 50, it's going to flicker. So our lights and everything work here at 25 frames per second. So when you're choosing your aperture, choose whatever you want, whether it's f11, whether it's f4 or f2.8, choose the depth of field that you want. Make sure your shutter speed is 50 to balance out with the 25 frames per second that our monitors and our electricity works at. And then choose the ISO to balance out the other two. So look at your light meter and choose the right ISO for that. Now, this is why with live streaming and video, lighting is really important, like buying light panels and external light panels, because obviously if you're choosing an aperture and a shutter speed, if your shutter speed's stuck at 50 and you want to shoot at f4, but to do that in your room, you need to put an ISO of 6400, your live stream is going to come out noisy. And so that's why people buy lighting, to basically bump down their ISO really low for video. That's the only way you can really do that. So clean HDMI output to get rid of all your settings, shutter speed at 1/50, aperture whatever you want to get the look that you want, and using the ISO to balance out those two with the light meter. Thanks, Vagabonds. Glad that you learned a lot. And Tanya, do you use any manual autofocus tips? Do you use any features, facial detection? Yes, I do actually. So I really like the facial detection and eye detection for portrait stuff. Most of your cameras nowadays would probably have that. I use that to basically get the closest eye in focus really quickly. I only use manual focus when I'm shooting video or landscapes. And I have a little cheat to do manual focus on landscapes because I'm super lazy and I don't want to like roll a wheel to find my focus. What I like to do is when I'm on the tripod, I use autofocus and I focus on whatever subject I want in my landscape. Then I quickly switch the lens switch to manual so that I don't have to rotate to get to where I need to focus. I autofocus first whilst I'm on my tripod. And then once I've got that focus, I switch it off autofocus and put it onto manual. Then it's always going to be at that point. So your camera doesn't have to refocus every time you have to take a photo. And it's on manual focus, so it'll always be there. So then you can just keep taking photos. Really good for if you're going to be doing landscape stuff, or really good if you're going to be doing bursts of a subject that's always there. I do that. So I tend to manual autofocus first to get my focus point, put it on manual on my lens. Then I just leave it at that if I need to do that. I only rarely roll my manual focus wheel if I'm doing video. So that's the only time I do it. Or if my camera is really struggling on autofocus, then I'll do it. But otherwise, I won't use anything. I won't do full manual. I won't do anything else. That's my only tip. Use face detection, use eye detection when you can if you're shooting portrait. Otherwise, what I do like about autofocus is having a single point, actually. If you can switch your autofocus so it's just like one square. You can't really see that on my webcam. But I just have it as one dot or one square in the center. And I can move that around with my joystick wherever I need to move it. I don't like using it on a auto area for autofocus because then it captures too much outside of it. I normally tend to have it just one point and I move that point if I need to, or I just shoot in the middle. Any other questions, guys? Otherwise, we'll end it so you can go on with your Sunday, the rest of your Sunday. Go out, take some photos, have some fun. Thank you so much, guys. And until next time, until our next webinar, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.